OK Motor Talk.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to yet another podcast. I'm Mike.
I'm Jim. Good evening, good day, good morning, whatever time of day it is for you at home.
I'm Graham. Hello and welcome.
With typical brilliant timing, and without revealing too much of what goes into these fantastically professional podcasts, we're recording this just before the F1 launches are about to happen. So there's lots that are coming. We've had all the invites to these. Many of them have been embargoed, which means we can't talk to you about them. Actually, but we can talk to you about them because they've already been launched.
Well, we've seen the Haas, in inverted commas, such as it is. I think it's definitely a computer-generated mock-up, and I think they've had to make some last-minute changes to it. Because if you look at the odd intricacies of the suspension, there's a very weird bit of Photoshop. It's not quite like one of those magic puzzles where it's a set of stairs that goes down and down and down and down, and when you look at it, it doesn't physically work.
MC Escher.
That's the one. But there's definitely a little bit about it. I think somebody had to change something at the last minute because all the teams, we'll get all the launches in the livery reveals. But for the actual cars themselves, I think we're going to have to wait until, well, possibly until Bahrain, until we know what the cars actually properly look like. So I think the information coming out of Barcelona is maybe going to be sketchy at best.
And I think there will be changes between the two, even though they're only a couple of weeks apart. But I mean, I'm rather irked by the FIA because we did ask them to bring everything forward so that we could be as topical as possible, and would have been able in this podcast to review all of them. But the view seemed to be they couldn't afford to upset Lewis anymore. They're stuck with their original dates. Either that or the Bahrainis have put even more money in the pot to downgrade Barcelona, which I suspect is nearer the reality.
It'd be unusual for them to make unpopular decisions during F1, though, wouldn't it? I'm sure that'd be fine. Compared to what happened last season, I reckon we'd be okay if they just wanted to shift it forward a day or so for us. That's a small fish, really. It's a small fare to worry about. Nothing quite so major. I reckon that'd be fine.
Lewis has apparently been in the factory for a couple of days in the Mercedes factory, but I didn't think it took that long to pick up your P45, but there you go. Obviously, I'm not au fait with driver contracts.
Well, I think he'd posted on Twitter the other day, Lewis, hadn't he? I've been away, but now I'm back, or
yes.
Words to that effect. So I think he's been in the Grand Canyon the whole time, so that maybe explains the lack of social media posts, because I don't think you get much signal at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, do you? But he's obviously disappeared to take stock and find himself, or switch off, or just maybe try and process what happened at the end of last year. But it's a few of his ex-teammates have always said an angry Lewis is a fast Lewis, and if ever you did get one over on him in qualifying or even practice sessions or a race, he'd come back the very next session and he'd have just raised his game. So it's if Mercedes can bolt together a good car, as they've had a reasonable habit of doing in the last few years, then I think we might see Lewis on rather good form.
I think so. I'm certainly hoping that that's the case, and the competition between the two leading teams would be nice if there were three leading teams, if somebody else joined the fray, so that it played out in a more interesting manner through the season. But certainly I would hope some of the heat in between various team bosses and between some of the drivers might be moderated a little bit. I gather even at this late stage there is talk of no longer broadcasting FIA conversations between the race director, the scrutineers, etc., and the team bosses, which I thought was a pretty stupid idea anyway. But then these things were in the past sorted out without needing to go to air on them. I think there's still a channel of communication, but as I understand it, that's not going to air, and the race director will, if it is still the same gentleman, will be supported by and at least one assistant, perhaps two, who knows.
Well, I think that's probably quite sensible, because if you are in the middle of directing a Formula One race, you've probably got a bit on your plate. I think one thing that highlighted that was Toto saying, Michael, I sent you an email. Did you read this? No, Toto, I don't check my emails during a race. I've got one or two other things going on at the moment. The amount of multitasking you're expected to do, I think, to have a buffer or a filter for what gets through and what doesn't get through, or it might just be an answer phone, to be fair. The welcome to the Tesco mobile voicemail service for Michael Massey is not available at the moment. Please leave your message after the tone. And, a race kicks off and he has 342 missed calls and 317 voicemails. It'll take him a while to catch up on it afterwards. But is it too much for one person? I mean, Charlie seemed to cope reasonably well with it.
Well,
but
quite so,
I think
Charlie
it was rather a different personality, and I think there was a rather different level of respect that went on between the teams, the drivers, and Charlie compared to the teams, the drivers, and Michael Massey. I mean, it's quite clear that if Charlie was a rugby referee, then Michael Massey is most definitely a football referee with the amount of badgering and hounding that goes on. So whether it's just the teams and the managers and the drivers who are just pushing their luck to see what they could get away with, and it's almost got out of hand. You think, oh, well, I did that and got away with it. So in Formula One, everybody is paid to push the envelope as far as they can. That's literally their job description, to maximise absolutely everything you can. And if you give any of the teams an inch, they will take a mile, they will take a double diffuser, they will take ballast, they will take... how often does that fuel flow sensor measure fuel flowing? Oh, every 100th of a second, or every other 100th of a second. Okay, so if every other 100th of a second we happen to fire more fuel into it, no, that won't get picked up. Right, that's fine, we'll do that then. It's the sport, as the margins have become so fine, the marginal gains and where you need to look for them, you need to look for absolutely everything. So that buffer and that chain and somebody filtering out the noise and the people shouting at him, I think will allow Michael, or as you say, whoever happens to be in charge of it, able to make better decisions, to make decisions that matter to a world championship when you've got a couple of different people screaming at you is not easy. So yeah, I think a buffer is a very good idea.
Yeah, I quite agree. The difference, I think, with Charlie's position, and he was a strong character. He'd been there forever, and he had the ultimate big hitter backing him before that big hitter sort of retired, because he was Bernie's man through and through. He was Bernie's original appointee. And if you picked a fight with Charlie, you picked a fight with Bernie, and that was not a smart thing to do at any time in F1, particularly if you needed his finance to float your team the following year, which did sometimes happen. So, we'll see. The Michael Massey situation, I believe, is to be resolved by Bahrain, or in Bahrain, more accurately.
Well, yeah, I think it's the Friday of Bahrain, isn't it? So it's maybe a little bit late, but we shall see. Anyway, I think enough on Formula One, bearing in mind we've only had one Photoshop launch so far.
Mm-hmm. So, moving on then from new cars to existing cars to new cars, 2022. Is there anything exciting otherwise that's coming? I see actually the World Car Awards and the contenders for that. And these are decided by a huge list of journalists. And unsurprisingly, almost everything on it is an SUV. There's a surprise. Although not quite everything, is it?
Not quite. The Toyota GR86, I don't think qualifies as an SUV. It's quite an interesting and exciting car with plenty of technology built in.
I like these. I think these are pretty cool. Some skinny tyres, not a lot of power, but a lot of fun. And there's, of course, the Subaru Brz or BRZ, which I don't think we're actually getting this time round, are we?
Don't think so. I think, didn't Subaru pretty much entirely pull out of the UK market?
Or did they decide they suddenly wanted to double their sales? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure that anyone really knows what's happening with Subaru. But apart from rebadging a few cars and doing some badge engineering, not quite so bad as Suzuki, perhaps, who have got the RAV4 and the Corolla now under different names with a different badge on it. But they were keen to increase their sales in this country, and Dealer Up had to, as far as I'm aware, add a few more dealers to the list. But it's difficult at the moment if you don't have a strong electric proposition. So it's probably no surprise that there's some electric cars in the list. We've got the Kia EV6, which I think is quite a cool looking thing. There's the Ioniq 5, which is of course the same car, which is a retro looking thing, although we weren't really massively keen on the quality on the interior of that. And there is the Mustang Mach-E in there.
There is a separate top 5, which I don't quite understand, because there's a considerable overlap, with one exception, which is one of the Mercedes E-Class. And that's an all-electric top 5, which is also announced today.
To be completely honest, there's so much electric in the top 5, you could run a small country. Certainly a few houses off of it. You've got the Q4 e-tron, which is quite literally an SUV that happens to be electric with funky mirrors. And then there are a few other bits, aren't there? Cupra Formentor, which is, I think, quite cool, which is not an SUV, but not a car, so place that where you will. The Civic, which is quite literally okay. That's the type of car, I think, if you said, draw a car to a child, it's the 3-box sort of shape that you would draw. I mean, it's not quite so offensively ugly in terms of the fact that before it looked like 7 or 8 different people had designed each aspect of it, and everyone had gone, yeah, that's fine, we'll just do that. This is a collaborative effort.
Yeah, well, what's the phrase? There's no such thing as a bad idea. But that's when you end up with cars like the Citroen C4 Cactus.
Ugh, yeah.
Yes, a visual delight.
Interesting, I think, the C4 Cactus, the earlier ones, all the barnacles on the doors, it looked a bit different. And now it's just, the current C4 Cactus looks like a car, and not a particularly exciting one. So, fair play, it looked a bit different. If you're kind of niche, then maybe that's the car for you. I can't say I'm massively excited by a lot that's in there, but I am pleased to see an ICE-powered car in there for a start, or a few of them. I will just actually go back to the Civic and say that very good car to drive in terms of Type R. A phenomenal bit of kit, just maybe a bit too... how should I say this? McDonald's tea tray? Would you understand what I mean by that? You know, under the back wheels, handbrake on, and wah, 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 wah. Anyway, listeners of a certain age will know exactly what I mean by this, and it's definitely something that none of us did in Mark III Fiestas and Golfs and Polos and things like that. It never happened for any of us. I don't know, really. I'm finding it very difficult to get excited about a lot of cars that are currently out there. Though some of them are very impressive, there's not a lot that really tickles the pickle, and I'm pleased, like I say, to see the GR86 as it is now, GR86, fighting amongst the candidates.
Yeah, I think it does make a nice change to have something like that in there, because I think that's the GR86 or BRZ is one of the few cars on the market at the moment that I'd probably go out and buy with my own money. And when I say with my own money I'd saved up and empty the bank balance all in one go, you know, rather than on the monthly payment, because it never quite seems so bad if it's X pounds a month, does it? But it's a car for driving, for enjoying. It's not the most practical, not the most spacious, not the most comfortable, not the best at anything in particular, but what it does do is what it wants to do, and that is be a car for driving, and it does it very well. And that's, I really do like that out of all the other SUVs that are in there. And okay, SUVs serve a purpose, but still not as good as an estate car, I would argue, and I think most people, well, certainly everybody on this podcast would agree.
Agreed.
But most of the lineup, they're all just a bit copy-paste, aren't they? Yes, there's differences, but they all do kind of just look like a bunch of SUVs. And actually, if you took the badges off, I think I'd have a hard time telling them all apart at first glance without having another one to refer to. You know, I know the front ends on them are quite different, and the Ioniq 5 is the most different looking out of all of them. But if the car quiz of if they took a few close-ups, you know, the Kia EV6, if you look at the front wheel and the arch arrangement over there, that looks very much like the Mustang Mach-E, and there's a bit on another one that looks exactly like one of the others, and it's just, you know, do you need that many electric SUVs in Car of the Year? But then I suppose what's been launched this year? Electric SUVs, and that's it.
The one I think that is quite intriguing that it's in there at all is the Genesis G70. You know, this is a selection of cars chosen by supposedly 120 of the top motoring journalists worldwide. And generally speaking, the media have been very down on the Genesis. I mean, I drove a Genesis early on, quite liked it. It's not spectacular, but I quite liked it. But I'm slightly surprised to see it in there when generally most magazines have slagged it off. So it just seems slightly anomalous.
I think it probably highlights a point, actually. That was flicking through the list, so I thought, I'll Google Genesis GV70, G70, whatever it is. And in the Google suggested questions around the subject that you're searching for, if you search Genesis GV70, people also ask, who makes Genesis GV70? So that it's literally in the who makes the Volvo 850. It's literally there in the name, but I think that probably highlights it. Who? Never heard of them. Which is maybe something Genesis need to overcome in this country. Well, they certainly will need to overcome it in this country.
Are they going to become the next Infinity? If you remember when that launched with with all two of their dealers or whatever it was, one in Birmingham, one somewhere else.
That sold really, really well in the States, though, didn't it?
The thing is,
it was leading its market sector for several years in the States. It just never took off here.
I drove almost all of the Infinities when they came into the country, and they were what you'd expect from a posh, in inverted commas, Nissan, with the same sort of switchgear and everything else that you kind of expect from, a higher end Japanese car. There's still a lot of plastic, I thought, going on. They weren't particularly exciting to drive, and they were relatively juicy. And I can't even remember what they were called, but I drove back. There was the coupe one, which was, I think, 300 brake horsepower V8 maybe, I'm not sure. And it's about the only car I've ever driven that's tried to actively kill me on the straight. I'd come off the there's a roundabout not too far from us, a big roundabout that leads into a dual carriageway towards a bridge, and Jim will know exactly what I'm talking about. And I came off the roundabout at quite a sedate pace in second gear, it's auto, and just put my foot down, and it just absolutely pooed itself, and I fishtailed all the way down from the roundabout to this bridge, just thinking, oh God, this is going to be an almighty crash in a minute. And from one side to the other, before it eventually decided, oh, okay, I've had enough with interfering with the various different electric aids or whatever that was trying to correct the fact that it was going from one side to the other. And I've just thought, oh, sod it, just put my foot down, and it pulled itself straight. But terrifyingly antiquated to drive in that respect. I was not expecting it to kick out, in the same way that you would get maybe an old muscle car to do this, but then to try and constantly correct itself, and you were just fighting it the whole way. It was terrifying to drive at anything like pace, unless it was completely dry. On the performance note, though, there is a world performance car list with finalists. There's the Audi e-tron GT, which is pretty cool, though I think the Taycan's a better looking thing, and it's obviously the same car underneath. There is the Bmw M3/M4. Well, they're two different cars, really. Appreciate one's got more doors, and both of them have it looks like a skull. If you imagine where a nose used to be, and you've got the two big cavities, that's what the grille is. Absolutely hideous.
I quite agree. The latest BMW grilles are really...
What are they
really
thinking
horrible.
about? The rest of the car would be fine if they just changed the grille. There's the 911 GT3, which will obviously be fantastic because all of the 911 GT series are fantastic. The Toyota GR86/Subaru Brz.
How many categories is that car entered for? Because wouldn't it be nice if it won all of them?
It would be nice.
Slightly old-fashioned internal combustion engine, two-seat, front engine, rear-wheel drive, manual car wins everything.
You've just spec'd an MX-5.
I think that'd be quite nice, wouldn't it?
That would be amazing.
Highly unlikely, but it would be nice.
And also the Golf GTI/R. Again, completely different cars. One's all-wheel drive, with the Heldex, obviously. The other's front-wheel drive. They drive completely differently. They look vaguely the same. And now, obviously, being the new version of the Golf, it has a revised interior with a hopeless touchscreen, which is slow to react, and they've lost all the buttons, and doesn't feel quite so nice inside. I quite liked the old R and the GTI. I looked at buying a GTI estate, funny enough, when I bought the S3, but they discontinued it. Yeah, I'm not sure quite how they've grouped those two together, because they're definitely two different cars.
One car I was slightly disappointed not to see on there, because we've spoken about SUVs and our indifference, but actually we all decided that if you had to have an SUV, then a Lamborghini Uranius would probably be the one to have. Until the DBX 707 came out, and I look at that and I kind of actually really, really want one of those. It's
nice.
The first time I've looked at an SUV and thought, yes.
Yeah, I can quite concur with that. A very interesting looking motor car.
Can I also throw into the mix at this point Alfa Romeo? Because obviously there's a Stelvio, which I think is a good looking thing.
Brilliant car.
And there is now the Tonale, which I think is also a very good looking thing.
The toenail.
The toenail. I would be quite happy to drive the Tonale. I think that is a very good looking car.
I make an exception for the Stelvio. It's one of my favourite cars. I think I've driven 2 over the last 2 years. I mean, anybody that's got an MPV that does 176 and 0 to 60 in, 5 and a bit seconds, that's not really an SUV. It's a sports car. It's just a big sports car, but brilliant handling. Wonderful car to drive.
Okay, so there are a few exceptions to the rule. There always has to be an exception to the rule. And I think Alfa Romeo are one of those that capture your hearts, don't they?
Yeah, in the same way as Maserati does. For me, anyway.
I have to admit something. I do have to admit something at this point. Over the last week, I got rather taken by a Alfa Romeo Brera. And in secret, I've been messaging Dave saying, what do you reckon on this?
You've been having your own private conversation.
I have, outside of the group. Because I thought that potentially he could be the bad influence that would convince me to buy it. A relatively low mileage, relatively high spec Brera that had an owner from pretty much new, was in East Sussex, so not too far away. And it was nice, and it was blue, and it had a pan roof, and it was just very pretty. And I have no idea what I would do with it, or why I needed it really. But when you look at something, you think, I'm just really tempted by that. I've got an Alfa itch I should scratch, and I should think that most itches you need to scratch probably aren't good, and I suspect that this is another that probably isn't good. But sadly it's sold, so I missed out there. I'm afraid my money is still safely locked away in the bank where I can't get to it. I've not ruined myself with Alfa ownership, although I did still feel the need to get something, and an opportunity came up, and I hadn't said this to you either, Jim, actually. I was on one of the various different forums that I'm on, and 2 friends of mine have got a Focus ST170 that belonged to my mate's sister, that wrote off a classic Rolls Royce the other day. By wrote off, I mean it completely obliterated it, but it does mean the engine is suddenly available. So I put 2 things together, and I've decided to take the 170 brake horsepower engine from the Focus, take the engine out of the Onion, and just do a little bit of work to the engine, and then refit that to the Onion, and instantly have a bit of a power upgrade.
Whoa.
What?
Would the ST engine not be better served in the Fist?
No, because it's a Z-Tech. Yeah, the Fist engine's a Duratec, so that's just going to be work. Although, I can have the gearbox with a 6-speed get-drag box, which you could stick in the Fist, if the ratios work.
That might actually work well, to be fair, because at least it might actually be able to accelerate going up the hill at Brands Hatch towards Druids, rather than just sort of bogging down or even slowing down, despite having your foot flat down to the floor. So, I don't know, that could maybe work. But again, that does sound like work to me. So,
what you will notice if you're listening to this is I skillfully managed to divert the conversation away from the fact that I cheated on my podcast colleagues to talk about Alfa Romeos, and amazingly I didn't get any abuse for discussing Alfas, and I think that's because everyone is kind of a closet Alfa fan. Is that fair?
I think we probably all are, indeed.
I think that's not even really closet, to be fair. It's just I like them. Although unlike you, I haven't had the urge to scratch that itch. You know, I look at them and think they're very pretty. Yes, I'd like one. Yes, I'd buy one. But I don't feel that urge to rush out and buy one.
I do. I fancy a 1.5. In truth, I fancy a 159 Estate, because I think that's a very well proportioned car and very pretty, and I like the 3 individual headlamps on the front. And it's just a great looking piece of machinery. And as a practical, semi-practical, mostly practical car,
you're trying to convince yourself now.
Yeah, trying to convince. It's not necessarily working. It just seemed like a good idea, and then this Brera popped up, and it was, as I say, all the right bits in all the right places, and all the right belts done and everything else, and it just think, I could open myself to a whole lot of hurt here. I kind of fancy it. I think they're a bit too heavy to be sporty. I think they're a bit too under-engined to be slow unless you go for the V6, and that's ruinously expensive to do the timing bout. It's several thousands, I think, to do the various different, I think it's 3-chain assembly on there. So this is really, really exciting geeky detail for you. So it's a GM engine block, but with Alfa Romeo heads on them, which makes it very expensive to look after. To the extent where I think if I went for the bigger engine one, it would be cheaper to run something like an Aston Martin on a on a daily basis due to the cost of the parts, which I think is hilarious. The fact that you could drive something more exotic and end up with a smaller build, but there you go. The temptation's there, and you never know. At some point, that might well happen. But in the meantime, I've had to make do by just buying myself a new engine and something I can stick in the onion. I appreciate a slightly different type of vehicle, and if you're interested in this, my weird and geeky obsession, then do go out and again check out the playlist on our YouTube channel. There are many parts of this now, and I have just been toiling and cutting myself to pieces and squeezing and gapped underneath the car to try and get this thing down and on the ground, so I can have a little bit of a garage revamp done, which is in a weekend's time, basically. So I've not got a lot of time to get it, in inverted commas, finished, but at least on the ground and movable. So yeah, if you want to have a look, check out our YouTube channel.
I couldn't figure how you could get under the car, because I certainly couldn't have got under that car.
Breathe in.
But then I'm a little older than you and carrying rather more weight, I guess.
Well, here's the thing. I was chatting to my dad about this because he came over on Saturday to help do some bits and pieces in the garden and do some wiring and stuff. And he said, look, you crack on and get the car sorted today, and I'll do this. And he squeezed underneath to help me get the fuel tank in place, because it was all a bit tricky to get in, so plenty of lube. And I managed to slip the fuel tank in. And I was saying to him that it's not that long ago. There's some photos of me. I must have been probably about 20, laying in the snow on a piece of carpet so I could fix something underneath the car whilst it was jacked up on an axle stand. So not even really high off the ground. And I got up from being under this. Basically what happened is, I'll be completely honest, I got stuck. So I managed to wiggle myself into a position under the car in the middle. And then I suddenly went, how am I going to get out? Because I was surrounded by axle stands and bits on the floor. And so I had to sort of turn myself round, and then, so I'm not that much older, only about 15 years older. But there I am, sort of getting cramp, with one leg up against the side of the garage wall, trying to squeeze out from underneath the car. And when you think, this is starting to lose its appeal. It's doing this underneath the car.
Have you not got a creeper, a little skateboard thing to slide a boot on?
I do. There's a slight problem with that, and that's because it's difficult to get the car very high in the garage for two reasons. Firstly, because my axle stands only go up to about 2 foot, maybe a little bit less. And secondly, if I get it higher than it currently is, I can't open the garage door. So I have to put the car too far back to get into the toolbox. So it has to be kind of where it is. And if I lay on the creeper, it either gets stuck in the ridges on the floor, and there's actually a load of cardboard on the floor at the moment to try and protect it whilst there's wax oiling. And here's the second problem. Because it's been cold, I've been wearing a body warmer in the garage over my like jumpers or whatever I've got. Gilet, as they're called these days. And if I go underneath the car on a creeper, I kind of get stuck between the two. So it's like as I slide out, I'm just covered in wax oil. So it's really unpleasant.
What you need to do is hurry up and get your roller shutter door fitted, yes. And then that will make life a lot easier, won't it? Because you can have the car further towards the front.
Exactly that. And there's space then to put things above the car on the ceiling, which gets more stuff out of the way, which means there's a bit more space to work. And these are all good things, but I need to get the car complete enough to be able to do that in the first place. And hence I've got a weekend left to do it. And no spoilers, if you haven't seen the full series yet, we are at a point where the car is near enough ready to move now. I've got a few bits to do, which means probably a few late nights in the week, and then some hardcore action on the car over the weekend, and it should hopefully be able to drive out and stop under its own steam. Well, not steam, but vapor of oil. That's what it should hopefully be able to drive out in its own mist of oil.
You've just sort of set me thinking that any respectable and self-respecting DIY mechanic, up until not so many years ago, would have had a pit covered in boards. Everybody had one a generation ago, and now nobody has one.
This is a problem. I have worked in a pit. I worked in a place that had an MOT station, I can't remember what they call it, grandfather rights or something similar, that could still continue being a pit. And it is miserable working in a pit, and you smack your head on everything.
Yep, that's true.
It's just dank and cold and horrible. So it's useful. It is useful, particularly at home, assuming that when you dig down you don't hit water, which is another problem.
I think it's fairly safe to say that they're not the safest either, pits, are they? Because it's quite easy to get trapped in one if something goes wrong. You know, if the car's up on a ramp and you've got the height, then it's far safer. Yeah, well, talking from experience of a colleague, he was right at the end of a rather long pit, and it happened to be full of petrol, and the petrol caught fire, so he ended up rather badly burnt after that. So I think the disappearance of pits is probably no bad thing for the general health and safety of amateur mechanics. I think it is a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting they bring them back because, well, for all the reasons that we've collectively just stated, it's just I was sort of mourning the passing of them, if you like, the fact that they just you don't see them anymore.
Perhaps a small or a shallow pit might be the answer. So just down and smooth enough to get under the car on a creeper, but not so deep that you could end up trapped in there, or you rely on it for too much, just to ease access a little bit, maybe.
Might be helpful. Stop the car from grounding out and everything as well whenever I go anywhere. Just puts parts in there. Oh, is this going to clear? Is this going to clear? Oh, I can just adjust it up a bit, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I think probably once Phase 1 is sorted and all the suspension and brakes are all overhauled, Phase 2 is done and got the engine in there, hopefully I won't have to spend too much time underneath it. I can certainly see why people pay people to do stuff to cars, because, you know, it is, particularly this time of year, and if you've got a lot to do, it is pretty gruelling just to keep at it. But hopefully the end result will be worthwhile, and I guess we'll find out soon enough whether it was. There you go. Stay tuned.
I'm roughly double your age, so... and I'm pretty much decided now I don't want to be under cars anymore. Let somebody else do the underneath stuff.
I've exceeded expectations here by coming in twice as fast as you there and giving up.
I didn't earn the title mean mechanic for no reason. I'm too bloody mean to pay anybody else to do something I can still do myself.
Well, there will be electric soon. You won't have to do anything to them, so that's it. I have to worry about it.
Oh, I'll fiddle with those as well.
Make sure you lick your fingers first before you touch any of the orange wires.
Exactly so. I was told years ago that wires were just vehicles for carrying smoke. So when something went wrong, smoke would come out of one end or the other. That's because they were full of smoke. It seemed reasonably logical.
Disclaimer from UK Motor Talk: if you want to work on your EV, don't. It will kill you. And on that meandering note, I guess it's time we probably say goodbye. So from me, Mike, it's goodbye.
From me, Jim, it's goodbye. Take care, all.
From me, Graham, take care. Bye-bye now.
UK Motor Talk, a First Take Media production.